The Sony ZV-1 is one of the most talked about cameras of 2020. It's marketed as being made for content creators and vloggers, but is this a good camera for beginner content creators? What's up YouTube, my name is Chaus, and as a beginner content creator on YouTube, I thought it would be a good idea for me to talk about the camera that I use, the Sony ZV-1, why it appealed to me, and why I think it is a good camera for beginner content creators and vloggers. If you clicked on this video, then you probably already know about the Sony ZV-1, but let's just go over some brief specs that stood out for me. So the lens is a fixed focal length of 24 millimeters, and it has an aperture of f1.8 to 2.8. It's able to shoot 4K at 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second, and it can shoot 60 frames per second at 1080p. It also has a slow motion feature that can shoot 240 frames per second and 960 frames per second. The price comes in at $699, and although it's not the most budget-friendly camera, I do think that it is a nice middle ground between budget cameras and more expensive ones. So before I talk about some more specs that are pros for me, let's just go ahead and get some cons out of the way. My first con for me is the fixed focal length. So 24 millimeters isn't very wide, and that's something that you really have to be aware of when you're shooting your subject and you're making sure that it's in frame and you're not cropping it out of the frame. And also, you're not able to buy an additional camera lens and put it on this camera. You're just stuck with that 24 millimeters. Now, this is something I was already aware of before I bought the ZV-1, and for my use case, it works out well for me. I'm mostly just vlogging like I'm doing right now, and if I am shooting a subject, then I just make sure that I'm far enough away from it to make sure that it looks good in the recording. My next con is battery life. The batteries that come on this camera are very small, and when you're recording in 4K and also using autofocus, your battery lifetime can be about less than an hour. So what I did is I bought some extra batteries. As soon as I bought this camera, I bought some third-party manufactured batteries on Amazon, and I'll link them down below. They're relatively cheap, and I just make sure that I always have them charged when I start recording, because I know at least one of my batteries are going to go exhausted. The final con that really stood out for me is stabilization. It isn't great on this camera. When the stabilization settings are turned off, footage is extremely shaky, and any movement that you have when you're walking or running, or if you're shooting something in motion, that is going to appear on the recording, and it almost makes the footage unusable. You can see in this footage of me and my dog Rocky going on a walk, I have the stabilization turned off and it's really bad, but when I turn on active stabilization, it does improve it. So there are two settings, the active stabilization and standard stabilization. Active works the best. However, when you have active turned on, it substantially crops the image. Another way to fix the stabilization on the ZV-1 is to purchase a gimbal. And unfortunately, I don't have a gimbal for this camera as of yet, but I do plan on buying one in the future. So when I'm recording in motion, again, I just turn on the active stabilization, and then I also have my camera sitting on a Switchpod Tripod. So that kind of helps improve some of the shakiness of the camera. And then also when I'm editing my footage in the software Final Cut Pro, they do have some features in there that can improve stabilization as well. So if I'm shooting something that's more cinematic or I'm trying to slow something down, I usually add that on top of it. Let's move on to some pros. I really feel like this camera was marketed for me. As an aspiring YouTube creator, I started off recording on my iPhone, and although that is a really good choice to start with, there was just some things that I couldn't accomplish on the iPhone. I really like to shoot on the back camera with the iPhone, even when I was vlogging, and you can't see yourself when you do that. Obviously the front camera will work better for that scenario, but I wanted to use the best quality camera on the phone. With the Sony ZV-1, you don't have to worry about that. It has a flip out display and you're able to just flip it out towards you when you're looking right at the lens. So as of right now, I'm recording on the Sony ZV-1 and I'm staring right into the lens, but I have the display flipped out towards me. I'm looking at the display now. I can see that I'm in focus and then I'm in frame. I can see that my background is lit and it's just extremely helpful. And if you're vlogging, it's really a necessity to have a camera with a flip out display. My next pro is autofocus. Autofocus is really good on this camera, and coming from using an iPhone previously for YouTube videos, which is also known for great autofocus, this was an easy transition. And it has some great additional features that come along with that, including eye detection. It even has pet detection for photography, and it also has a feature called Product Showcase. So when Product Showcase is turned on, you're able to put a product in front of your face and it goes from focus on your face to that product. So I can demonstrate that with this model motorcycle I have. And if I put it up in front of the camera, it easily locks in and focuses on that motorcycle. And as soon as I take it away, it goes back to me so fast. It's a really great, awesome feature. If you're someone who's planning on reviewing any type of product on YouTube, this is the camera to go right here for that. I mean, look at that, so quick, it's so useful. Okay, my next pro is probably my favorite feature on this camera, and that's the bokeh switch / bokeh blur button. Bokeh can make a video look so good and so buttery, and that was something that was hard for me to achieve on an iPhone because of the small camera sensor. But with the Sony ZV-1, it's extremely easy. All you have to do is hit that bokeh button and you remain in focus, or your subject remains in focus, and the background is blurred. And then if you hit the button again, it brings everything back in focus. That is really awesome. And obviously a lot of cameras achieve bokeh very well and achieve a blurry background very well. But you have to usually mess with the settings a lot, change the ISO, make sure you're in focus, change the aperture. But with the Sony ZV-1, it's so easy. A beginner like myself can achieve it every time by just hitting that button. I'm gonna go ahead and give the mic on this camera a pro as well. If you're starting off on YouTube like me, you can definitely pass with just using the mic instead of buying an external microphone. I have noticed, however, that the further you're away from the camera, humming does increase with the sound of your voice, but you are able to adjust the volume of the mic in the settings on the camera. Right now I'm using an external microphone made by Pop Voice. I purchased that on Amazon, and I did a quick comparison down by the water to see how the internal mic sounds versus the external mic. Right, this is a sound test using the mic on the Sony ZV-1. You can test and see how clear my voice is, how much you can hear the surrounding noise in the background. There's a plane flying by, you can hear the water a little bit. So here's a test on the Sony ZV-1 mic. All right, so here's a test using the external mic on the Sony ZV-1. It's the wired Pop Voice microphone, and I have it attached onto my sweater here. Got a dog barking in the background. And so you can see the comparison between using the internal mic on the Sony ZV-1 and an external wired mic. One last pro that really stood out for me is the size of this camera. And it's pretty obvious. It has a smaller footprint than most phones, so you're able to easily throw it into your jeans or stuff it inside of a jacket. And unfortunately, we're not able to travel abroad due to COVID-19. But I'm looking forward to the time when we can travel again and I can be a tourist somewhere and I can just be walking around a city with my iPhone in my pocket and this camera, instead of lugging around my big backpack with a bigger camera inside and causing extra back pain. That small footprint of this camera just adds extra mobility and gives you that option of just pulling out your camera and vlogging no matter where you're at. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up. And let me know in comments down below if you purchased the Sony ZV-1 or if you plan on buying one in the future. Other than that, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.